Okay, here's a breakdown of the 18th point of the ring chain lightning game at Chesapeake with a score 12-6 in favor of chain. As chain pulls the disc, it hits the ground upfield 10 yards and is picked up by Tristan Green. There are two significant flaws here in Tristan's approach that stand out to me. The first thing to me is that his throwing mechanics are flat out horrible here. The angle his hips are tilted at looks to be about a 45-degree angle pointed towards the ground, and the angle of his shoulder seems to be even more acute. In order for him to be able to compensate for these two poor angles, the angle of his upper arm looks to be about a negative 15 degrees to straight up, perpendicular, and where otherwise it should be what I think maybe 25 degrees or so positive away from the body. So, he's overcompensating with his shoulders, his arms, everything to get the disc off. The second thing to me is that he's way off balance and his center of gravity is a couple feet away from where it should be, ideally. As you can see by the white line here on the left, which is Tristan's right, I've approximated where his center of gravity is while he's lining up his throw. The blue line on the right, which is Tristan's left, is where a thrower's center of gravity should be in order to be in the proper attack position. It appears to be a good 24 inches between where his center of gravity is and where it should be, meaning he's really way off balance. Now, most people's reactions would be, well, how is he supposed to throw around the marker? But when we step back and look at the whole field, he's got Mark Evans wide open in a location that would allow Tristan to stand completely upright and throw this. So this notion that you need to be able to stand out over your right foot to be able to throw around the marker is really a misconception that's been around for a long time that really has never been vetted or has a basis. The question I would ask in response would be, would you rather run an offensive system that relies on and encourages mediocre throwing mechanics, or would it be better to operate within a framework that put players in position to throw with superior throwing mechanics? In any event, the consequence of having both poor throwing mechanics and being way off balance is that Noah Saul has to go down on the ground to catch a pass. This should never really happen, ever. And to discourage this in practice, I implemented a rule whereby if a receiver has to go down on the ground to catch a disc, he must keep at least one knee on the ground to throw it. This is just something that you never ever really want to happen, and you want to do everything you can to discourage it because it screws up all the timing and the balance of an attack. Noah misses the timing for the throw back to Tristan or the negative penetration to move to Evans' left or to his right. One thing of note here is how Mark inexplicably moves from a place on the field where he is providing support and being an integral cog in the backfield to simply clearing out downfield and going from being a live player to a dead player for most of the remainder of the point. This really needs to be addressed. It's worse than a waste of time. He would have been far more useful without exerting any calories and just standing still rather than doing what he did. Now here we've got a huge problem that needs to be fixed. You've got 4 dead players, and the only live player in the frame isn't really live because Saul isn't really honoring him. So far, what has the offense done in this point to dictate tempo or to control the defense in any way? It hasn't really done it at all. What the upfield receivers need to be doing here is that all of them need to have their hips vectored or facing directly back at the thrower. So no matter where you're moving around on the field, if you've got your hips always pointing at the thrower, you're most likely going to be in a live position, including Evans, who's running adjacent to the thrower. He should be running through with his hips pointing towards the thrower so they can be an option. Even though Evans shouldn't be in the first place. If he's going to make that cut, he needs to be live. This dead air, as it were, this gap in time where really there's no options and it looks like Noah's setting up, waiting for something to happen, causes the offense to be shut down for a bit. And after some time, Saul returns the favor by putting Green on the ground with a throw to the right flank. At this point in the sequence, almost nothing has been accomplished, and the defense is having its way with the offense. No one downfield is either open or live, and certainly there's nothing available to use to penetrate into the D. Okay, now Noah makes a decent cut here, a move that Mama Bird used a lot, a move that I used to use in California constantly. And Mama Bird used it to win collegiate natties. But here's what I'd like to do to improve this play, to dictate tempo and to really maintain the separation that's created. As you can see, Tristan's man cheats in to try to get the disc, leaving Tristan wide open. But rather than moving away from where the cheat is, he moves along with it. In other words, instead of creating even more separation, he made it less, really for no good reason. Also, what really makes this move much more powerful, Noah Saul's move, is if the cutter inverts his pivot when he catches a disc rather than pivoting up the line. And an inverted pivot by no means eliminates the upfield throw, and in fact, it becomes more powerful. But at the same time, all the other players on offense are engaged and kept alive as well. And most importantly, the defense, as you will come to know, will begin playing much more softer here if the pivot's inverted. One particular play that works very well here, both in terms of creating separation as well as putting the defense on its heels, is for Tristan to drift away from the play into the negative space, and for Noah to invert his pivot and hit Tristan. And then for Tristan to hit the cross-field pass on the penetration move where he can get the disc back in the center of the field. Instead, take a look at what happens as Tristan takes the so-called obvious downfield motion. By the time he does get the disc back, he's trapped again and on the sideline, and once again, at least for a moment, there aren't any live players. Nothing's really been produced here. In spite of all of this effort so far on this point, nothing has really been accomplished other than now the disc is at midfield. This is against what appears to be changed third string defense. This next throw, the inside-out break, in and of itself is decent, but again, there doesn't seem to be any particular intention or purpose behind it, and as a consequence, it's not nearly as powerful as it should have been or as it could have been. Now what I've done here is loop this move to see if you can see why it's not really a penetration move and what it would have taken to actually penetrate and break down the defense. Once again here, Tristan's center of gravity is way off balance over his right foot, his non-pivot foot, and as a result his ability to explode is somewhat compromised, which is why I encourage players in the penetration drills that I run to have their non-pivot foot in the air as part of the sequence. You can watch him actually take a step backwards after he throws to initiate his throw and go move, and he's still effective at achieving some separation. Just imagine how much more separation he would have been able to get if he had all his weight on his pivot foot as he was throwing and going. What Tristan could have done instead of driving towards Jarrett's backfield would have been to vector towards Bowen's left, because Jarrett's facing him, on an in-cut, sealing off the defender on the way. By sealing his defender, Tristan would have gotten the disc on the interior of 4 defenders on the inside of the field, and this would have been a true penetration. There are 4 defenders here, more or less in a square, and had Tristan been able to effectively run with the disc and regain possession on the interior of these 4 defenders, that would have been a textbook penetration move, and the defense would have been severely compromised at this point. From the interior here, not only does Tristan have wide open throwing lanes, but there are at least 5 legitimate penetration lanes. One back in Jarrett's direction, one towards the left flank, one towards the right flank, and one in the direction down the gut of the field towards the center of the end, towards the end zone, and one back in the direction from where he came from. This last penetration move, the one I've put in red, would be a fairly good idea of what I call a misdirection play. Everyone on the field would expect a continuation of the give and go move, whereas a misdirection play would come back in the same direction you came from. And this usually breaks the field wide open because that's why it's misdirection. It's exactly the opposite of what everybody thinks it's going to be. Instead, what happens here is that Tristan attacks the backfield, which in and of itself isn't a horrible idea, but then Jarrett just disses the disc back to him and doesn't really do anything to dictate tempo. There's simply no awareness of what Tristan has just accomplished and whether any separation was created, what advantage gained, and anything that was gained is immediately given back. And worse yet, with a completely empty backfield, so the offensive attack again is very lopsided and compromised. One play here that Jarrett could have run would have been a negative penetration style move to both create a backfield, free up a penetration lane upfield, and to perpetuate the advantage that he has on his defender. There are a number of positive scenarios that come out of this move. If Jarrett's defender stays home to cover Tristan's penetration move, then Jarrett can freely get the disc and most likely penetrate to the left flank. I've put Tristan's and his defender's movement in blue to show what the space would look like if Tristan had made for a penetration move. So those people wouldn't really be there if that happened. If Jarrett's defender does cover him in the backfield, movement shown here in blue, that leaves a wide open penetration lane for Tristan to penetrate into, and also leaves Jarrett now available to support the play from behind. What happens here does work in the sense that a successful completion occurs upfield, but this sequence is completely ineffective at doing anything to establish tempo or to place any control over the defense. It's all force and very little power. However, coming out of this situation, Jarrett doesn't make a nice penetration move, and for what seems like the first time in this entire point, the defense is on its heels momentarily, and there's a great opportunity for Tristan to penetrate through the gap between Jarrett and his defender. But he sits on the disc way too long, Tristan does, and forgoes any of the advantage that was gained. This shaded area in green has 5 offensive players all packed into one small region of the field, sort of like a stack, horizontal stack. And while this basically also forces 5 defenders into one small area of the field as well, it's not a very sensible way to create penetration opportunities. I believe this philosophy of packing a lot of offensive players into one zone of the field will be quickly outmoded since once everyone on the team is able to consistently, purposefully, and dynamically create and maintain separation. This next cut by Noah is the same one that he already did earlier in this point, and is really a great play-making cut. It's a powerful cut as opposed to a forceful cut. But a great deal of the advantage gained is immediately returned because he pivots up the line. If he attacks the negative space here by inverting his pivot, maybe even followed by a negative penetration move, he will not only maintain the separation here, but expand it. An attack isn't necessarily a throw or a cut, but just providing the indication to the defense that you could and would make the play if you wanted to. And that when you constantly communicate these attacks to the defense, they have to cover each one of these. I've said this again and again, but it really bears repeating. Each one of these attacks sets up the next point and the point after that, and the defense starts to second-guess themselves on what exactly you're going to do next. The point finishes with, again, a nice little backhand lift for the score, but this would have been much more cleaner of a play had Noah inverted his pivot instead of pivoting towards the end zone. He could have done the exact same throw, same exact play, but if he would have inverted his pivot and pivoted basically clockwise instead of counterclockwise, by the time he would have gotten around towards the end zone, he would have frozen his defender, who would have had to cover against the throw and go, and he would have basically had a markerless throw for the score.